And so after years of covering this issue, I'm just soaking up all this negative energy and this hate, and it's just too much. And I need to take a break. I just need a safe space. And so I decide to move out of the population centers in Jerusalem here, and Tel Aviv here, this graffiti, kick out the N-word. So I move away from Tel Aviv, and I moved down to Dimona. And the reason why I moved there, in a small town in the desert, is because that I'd heard that there's actually a population of Africans that had been living there for decades. And surely, if they had been there for all this time, Israelis must have gotten used to their presence and gotten over this racist hatred. So I moved down to Dimona. It's actually a group of African Americans who, from Detroit and DC and Chicago, moved out to Israel in the late 60s and 70s. And their story is kind of interesting. They, at the same time as the civil rights era, and you have black people turning to the Black Panthers and some joining the Nation of Islam. And so there were African Americans who also embraced Judaism or the Torah and the Old Testament, and forged a Afrocentric form of Hebraic practice and felt affinity for the land of the Bible, felt that their communal story lines up with the mythology of the Israelites of the Bible, and so saw themselves in that story and wanted to reinvent themselves and move. They were kind of like African Zionists in a way, and they got up and they moved to Israel. And so they'd been living in Dimona for decades, and that's why I moved there in January 2013. And I'm very happy I made that transition, and I've really enjoyed this last year that I've spent in Dimona. It's awesome walking around, and everyone's wearing dashikis, and it's pretty trippy. It's a great place. I really enjoy walking around, seeing black people actually with their head. You probably will think this is so strange, but just to see African men and women walking around with their heads up and not casting their eyes down every time they pass by a light-skinned person is a relief. And so I've really enjoyed this time, but I was dead wrong about thinking that Israelis had gotten over their racism because they were living in proximity to Africans for decades. So here again, I can't walk 2 minutes from my apartment in Dimona without being confronted with this graffiti: "We hate the N-word." And so I realized, that actually many people in the community were just as stateless as these African refugees who had arrived. So here's my friend Dalia, okay? Born in Israel, speaks fluent Hebrew, her partner is Israeli, they have a child together, yet she is just as stateless. She has no papers, she has no documents, she's not allowed to work, okay, legally. She has no access to health care. Or what if her baby gets sick? She can't go to a doctor, she can't go to a hospital, she's got nothing, all right? And she's lived there her whole life, and the only reason she has no rights is because she's not a blood Jew, And there's hundreds of people just like her who've born in Israel, lived in Israel their whole lives, and are in the same status. And so I went into the government archives and I started researching. And going back decades, I realized that this war on Africans was not new in any sense. It's only now that there's 55,000 Africans in the country. But even when there was only 1,500 Africans in the country, the government was determined as ever to drive them all out. So in 2012, you have Miri Regev, as I said, declaring that Africans are cancer, slagging them. But even as far back as 1980, you have member of Knesset Dov Shilansky, later on the Speaker of the Knesset, saying that all the Africans should be put on a boat out at sea, and people calling to drown the boat, drown them all at sea. And in 2012, you have Knesset researcher preparing an official Knesset report, which went to official police statistics, found that Africans consistently have lower crime rates than native Israelis. And because his report exonerated them, the Israeli government tanked the report, pulled it offline, and demoted him from his position. The same thing happened in the late 70s. with David Glass, member of Knesset, preparing this report on the African Hebrews and noting that police statistics showed they had lower crime rates than Israelis. Yet he was dismissed from the party and his report was never followed up on and shelved. And just as today, you have the vast majority of Israelis calling for all Africans to be kicked out. Okay, 61% want them all deported from the country, 18+% wanting them all jailed. So that's 80% of the Israeli Jewish population demanding that all African asylum seekers are rounded up out of Israeli cities. And back in the day, early 70s, same thing. A poll showed that most Israelis wanted the government to kick all the Africans out. Now you have the mayor of the city with the largest concentration of Africans, mayor of Tel Aviv, demanding that the government kick them all out of the country. Back in the day, same thing. Mayor of the city with the largest concentration of Africans, then it was Dimona, demanding the government kick them all out. But nowadays, the mayor doesn't only talk about it, isn't only demanding it, he's doing it too. He's sending his municipal inspectors to do their part, sending them into African restaurants to pour bleach into the cooking pots of the African restaurants so that there's no possible way that they could make a living.